thank you so much. I hope everyone enjoyed the screening. I am being joined by the director of this wonderful film, Shalini Kantayya. So, Shalini, this is your second independent feature film. And so, yes, I've been following your career and just a wonderful job done. And so, without further ado, let's just jump right in. So, like, the first thing that I have is that I am appreciative of the film and also concerned. So, one of the things that I really appreciate is that as I'm watching the film, there's so many things, like there's so many news stories that you bring up that were actually in the news that I remember, but you did a wonderful job of like tying it all together and then stepping us, the audience, through these are the things that are happening. So in many ways, this film is like about now. It's not one day, someday in the future. It's not sci-fi. This is like actually happening now. So if you could really talk about, how you were able to put everything together, to create this, hour and something long piece.
Mm-hmm. It was a journey, and I think it stems from my love of American science fiction, and I love technology. I love imagining the future. That's sort of the world I like to play in. And so when I discovered the work of Joy Bolamwini and Kathy O'Neill, who are now in my film, I sort of stumbled down the rabbit hole of sort of the underbelly of dark tech and some of the technology that we interact with every day.
So how did you discover them? So I got that this might be something that you do in your leisure, but they're grappling with some really heavy and hefty things. And also, I would also think that the language and terminology that they use as academics and also in this tech world might be not over your head, but over certainly the heads of many people, that they would be like, wait, exactly what are they saying? And that we actually need them to break it down for us.
I'm so glad you said that, Anjanette, because I couldn't talk to people for 2 years at parties because I couldn't explain to anyone what I was making a film about. I would end up saying I'm making a film about racist robots and how machines can be racist and sexist. And before you know it, I'd be like alone at the punch bowl by myself. And so I feel like we're just at the beginning of understanding. I feel so grateful. I think there's something like 7 PhDs in the film that kind of gave me an education. And for me, it was such a challenge as a communicator to try to distill someone who is a triple belt PhD and try to sort of get their body of knowledge and insight down to a 2-minute bite that's kind of entertaining and a little bit visual and still sort of be pushing the story forward. And then I think also, to me as a filmmaker, it wasn't just a challenge to tell visually, but it was also a challenge to tell emotionally. Because in one sense, I was trying to explain the science. And I think it's like we've seen with climate change and with COVID-19, just how important and vital the translation of science is to us being able to make decisions as a society. And I feel so grateful to these women in the film. And I feel that we are with, sort of algorithmic justice where we were with climate change, where people are just starting to understand what the implications are. And I think for me, there's the translation of the science, and then there's why it matters and who it matters most to. And that's, I think, was also a challenge, being able to capture in the UK the wrongful misidentification of a child, of a 14-year-old boy by police use of facial recognition, and sort of also get to the heart of why this matters. A teacher getting fired, someone getting a stricter probation that impacts their ability to do their job. I mean, these systems are really impacting our civil liberties, and so it's really important that we understand them and that we hopefully eventually have some laws around them.
Mm-hmm. Because one of the things that I also have been thinking about is like during times of crisis, that's when, for lack of a better word, politicians who are pressured by these large companies, in which right now tech, pharma, they're usually some of the larger companies are allowed to create things and kind of like slip it into our collective consciousness, so to speak, in times of crisis. And so I'm specifically thinking of like Homeland Security got created, in the wake of 9/11, and I remember thinking, wow, that's like a slippery slope for like so many other things to happen. And I'm like, people, are we like so far removed from COINTELPRO that we don't remember these things, right? And then also in terms of like the now and immediacy, I believe that, I'm not sure if it was Portland who just outlawed facial recognition in their city, like in the last week or so. So just thinking about, the crisis, we have several crises coming together, or several pandemics coming together, and then how that all works. Because as people are trying to safeguard against one thing, one other thing is being opened up. So, what are your, so if I'm making sense, like, what are your thoughts on this?
So I'm so glad that you said that, because I think that we are in this slippery slope with the crisis where Google and Apple want to come in and sweep in and say, we're going to solve this COVID tracking problem. We just need to know everywhere you've been and everyone you've been near, and I think we really have to look at that and what happens to that data. Who does it get sold to afterwards? How do we know what happens? This is stuff that we should be concerned with in a free society. And also, is it even solving the problem that it's meant to? Like, if we know that COVID disparately impacts communities of color and older people who don't have the highest tech phones, is this solution even the right one? Do we need a technical, logical solution or do we need a human one? And I do think that we're in this moment thanks to Joy Bolamwini and Timnit Gebru and Deborah Raji and so many of the courageous leaders in my film. I feel like we're at this moment where people are starting to make those connections. You saw in June of this year, IBM said they were getting out of the facial recognition game. They said, we won't research this, deploy this, which was a major move. Microsoft said they would not sell it to police departments, and Amazon said they would put a 1-year pause. And I think that was a combination, a 1-year pause on its sale to police. And I think that, and we saw also in the same month, the first ever legislation to declare a moratorium on facial recognition at the federal level. And that would mean FBI and ICE, right? Because these technologies were already being sold to law enforcement at these levels. And so I feel like that we all owe a debt of gratitude to the research that was done by these women, and also the movement on the streets that is really drawing the connection between the inherent value of Black life and these racially biased invasive surveillance technologies, and starting to draw the connections between civil rights and technology. For instance, if you go to a protest and a law enforcement, a police officer can take your photograph and pull up your whole social media profile, do we then have freedom to protest? If you have a record, if you're an immigrant, if you're on some sort of assistance, are you going to protest if you know you're going to be surveyed in that way by law enforcement? If we have freedom of speech, but if we say something that criticizes Facebook and Facebook hides it at the bottom of the algorithm like it did Elizabeth Warren, do we have freedom of speech? What happens then?
Right.
And so, or if Facebook won't fully commit to truth in our political ads, the most sacred thing that we have in a democracy, is infringing on our rights. And so I guess, I think in making this film, the thing that I got schooled about and terrified about was that this stuff is already making such important decisions about who gets hired, who gets a better quality of health care, who gets a higher prison sentence, and sometimes without being questioned, and working in a way that is not in a black box way, that is not transparent. And we should all be a little concerned.
And, because actually, we can see this playing out in China right now, China and Hong Kong. I've been following the protests there, and because Black Lives Matter protesters were also borrowing techniques from Hong Kong protesters, and then also to see the China crackdown on those protesters through utilizing facial recognition and other surveillance tools, to gather people. And then, to a certain degree, we also already saw this in, Arab Spring as well. These same kind of tactics.
I'm so glad you said that, because
hey,
Hong Kong is, you see how facial recognition becomes weaponized by the state, and how people from Hong Kong to these George Floyd protests are using things like lasers and makeup to try to, give themselves some anonymity, and how our faces have become this battleground.
Right. And I was also recently, I was looking at one of the financial news programs was talking about how tech companies are also pushing for facial recognitions when using our devices, because, interestingly enough, they're saying that I think that there is some truth to the fact that passwords are too susceptible for people to hack, whereas your face is not, or your biometrics are not. However, now in light of seeing your film, I'm like, at first I was on board with it. I was like, yes, because I already have too many passwords that I'm trying to keep up with. But my face, I can keep up with that, right? So I'm okay with that. But then after watching yours, I'm like, oh yeah, delete. So I'm like, no way. I will work out the password thing. I'll have to figure out some sort of system. But so what I really got is Americans coming to around the corner right here happening with you. So then what can we do to, is there any safeguards? Or I kind of feel like, guess what? Your stuff is already out there, because for most of us, we've been on social media for 10 years already.
Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right. And that's why these companies are so powerful, and we don't have a free market or competition, is because they've had this 10-year head start on our data, which makes, if you try to use another search engine besides Google, it's really hard, because Google knows exactly, it has 10 years of your data that it's storing. And here's the thing, is that we can't opt out of this life anymore. We're conducting this interview not in a movie theater where I'd much rather be with you, but at home over Zoom, privy to Zoom's privacy detections. And to me, it shouldn't be up to these tech companies to make such big decisions that interface with our civil rights. Our kids shouldn't decide between being able to go to math class during COVID and having invasive surveillance in his living room at home, right? Like, that shouldn't be the trade-off that we're yet making, and yet that's exactly the trade-off that we're already starting to make. And so what I really feel is that the gap is part education. Like, I really hope that this is why I make films, and we have a host of partners at Code for Bias / Take Action. These are real life superheroes who are doing amazing work in the field to protect democracy, civil rights, protect our faces from surveillance. Organizations like AGL, the ACLU, the Southern Poverty Law Center. And I have to mention, because this is South Arts, I just want to remind everyone to vote, because that's such an important thing, because it is the beginning of the conversation for everyone. So I hope everyone will make sure that they register and get a friend to register and take a friend to the polls, and make sure that we all vote this November.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that struck me is that this film is centered on women. So often when we get a little bit techie, it's just like a litany or just a trail of male experts who get to tell us about this world. And hooray! You centered it on women, and then, like, if you will, the protagonist is Joy, a Black woman in a field that is there represents 7% or something like that. So, like, you found like the 3 women, or like the few women who work in tech to talk about this, and like, in a little bit in terms of like what they go through in terms of being in this field. So if was that like a conscious thing, or they were just the best people to talk to about what you were interested in?
I think that there is a truth in that the people who are shining a light on bias in AI are women. That's what I found in the research for this film. I actually didn't set out to center. I think in my films, I'm always careful about who I center as experts, and I try to bring people of color and women to the forefront, because I think there's so much we're often missing from the conversation. And I think that part of what I learned in the making of this film is that inclusion isn't just something that's like good for the pictures, that we all have bias, that it's not like just one portion of the population that has bias. We all have bias, and we actually need each other to see each other into each other's blind spots. And that makes us more innovative in the technologies of the future, especially ones that are deployed as widely as technology products are. So I think there's that. And, just going back to your own question, I think it's women that are really taking action on this and leading the change towards legislation. And I think that that's really what I hope happens, is that what I began to see is that data rights are really part of our human rights, and to be seen as such. And the more that we can start to understand how data rights are human rights, and that we shouldn't be okay with just giving away all of our data. I know people have this attitude like, well, I have nothing to hide and it should be fine. And it's not the government, it's just Facebook and Google, And so, and I think we should be very, very concerned. And we have seen you know, in elections also, how information can be weaponized, how it can be used by the wrong, get into the wrong people's hands with hacks. We've seen how it can be used to prey on people. Zainab Tufekci uses the example of selling a compulsive gambler discount tickets to Vegas. There's scholarship that shows that the YouTube algorithm, if you have a inclination towards young women, keeps showing you younger and younger women till you get to an ethical, questionable line, because these algorithms don't have empathy and they don't have morals, and yet they're making big decisions that concern human opportunity. So that's kind of what I hope. That's what the people in the film taught me, and I hope the conversation. I hope that the conversation can be driven by an educated public, and that's what I saw. That it wasn't that these companies didn't know. It was both, you know, this bold research by Joy and the women in my film, coupled with, you know, active, engaged citizens on the streets saying we're drawing the connection between wrongful arrests and racially biased police use of facial recognition. And we're also seeing how, you know, people think that you can't outlaw this stuff. And I agree, it feels like pretty impossible to do things on a national level. But I do feel like we're having this moonshot moment where the cement is sort of not dry in these technologies, and we can sort of say, no, we want to have our democratic values, the things that we value as a democracy in these technologies. We don't want them to be used like China, like an authoritarian use, either whether that's by the state or whether it's corporations like Facebook. So, yeah, I know it feels like a lot. What I wanted to say this is that engaged citizens in local cities ban facial recognition by law enforcement in their local towns. And they did it first in technology places like San Francisco, Oakland, a suburb of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so basically exactly Portland, exactly what you're saying. And that's just a matter of 50 or 100 people showing up at City Hall and saying, we need to get this done right now.
Right.
And that's doable.
Right.
And so when we start to think, whenever I feel overwhelmed, I think, what can we do locally?
Well, it's also interesting because I was also thinking, well, of course, in the tech, you know, in these tech strongholds where people live, they're like, oh yeah, we don't want that because we actually know what it does. Right. And so like they're the first people to be like, oh no, we don't allow that here.
It's like used in secret on us all, you know, and
right.
We don't know how it's being used. My friend was assaulted on the subway and they found the person in 10 minutes. And people might call that a win. You know, the guy, you know, they pulled him up and we don't know how he was identified. That first man in Detroit was held for 30 hours, never asked for his license because he was wrongfully identified by facial recognition. And so, and the police trusted the computer. And so it becomes this new stop and frisk in this other dark mirror way.
Sure. Well, in terms of like, you know, whether or not we can stop anything, but Europe, you know, as you showed in your film, and well, you know, you showed the facial recognition gone wrong, right? But there's other places in Europe who are like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. We're stopping, you know, Facebook and Google are not allowed to collect the same amount of data in certain, you know, European countries. I can't remember which ones, but I remember, I know that is that is fact.
That's exactly right. So it's sort of like what I found in the film is like you kind of see a glimmer of the instance in China where it's this authoritarian use of data and this facial recognition with the scoring system and this whole living Black Mirror episode. And then you have the US, which is also like a wild, wild west. And you have Europe, which has some policy. And some of us have rights because our data passes through Europe. And so with Cambridge Analytica, you had David Carroll challenge and try to get the profile that Cambridge Analytica had about him. And he could do that because his data transited through Europe. So now you're sort of seeing, like climate change, like COVID-19, that data rights is a global issue. And it's something that we need science and information and global cooperation around because our data goes all around the world.
Right. Okay, I have one last quick question to get in here. So you were speaking, frequently about like it is up to us, the consumers, to stop this. And I am concerned on like whether or not we've gone too far, because, after watching your film, I thought of several films in which they already, like Hollywood, maybe hopefully not in connection with some of these companies or the government, have already kind of like seeded us that this is the future and like we should start to get comfortable with it. And I'm saying that because we do know that, Hollywood has been partners with the government and companies to get the American public comfortable with some things, i.e., flying consumer airlines. That was actually something that they all linked up and got done by creating these movies that glamorize, airline travel. So like we have this, there was, just in recently, Person of Interest. That show ran for like 4 or 5 seasons, not to mention like all the Mission Impossibles, Bond stuff. The Matrix is like an early kind of like seeding of like this integration of human and AI. And of course, there's like a bunch of other films. So is it too late?
No, we can't, but I do think that it's a moment. I've just been thinking so much about this moment because it's not an ordinary moment, and it's all a moment that we all have to do extraordinary things if we're going to live in a habitable planet with a working democracy. And it's not, when I say like, I feel like it's not the time to sort of be asleep at the wheel. Like none of us can afford to do that. And we all have to do things that we've never done before. We all have to sort of participate in a way. And I think I make documentaries because it always reminds me that everyday people can make a massive difference. And I have really, I swear to you honestly, seen that miracle in my film where 3 Black women scientists shine their light on racial bias on a technology that was already being sold and deployed by law enforcement, and had the bravery to do that. That happened in tandem with engaged citizens who took the streets and demanded human rights, a higher standard of human rights for all of us, basically. And then we saw this thing that I never imagined when I began the film, which is 3 of the largest companies put their invasive surveillance technology down. And I think that shows and reminds me and inspires me that a small group of people really can make a difference. That knocking on your friends' doors and your neighbors' doors and canvassing or doing your little part, or just that extra act of kindness in the middle of COVID-19 actually does matter. And so what I've learned is like, or what I feel right now is that our biggest enemy, it's easy to paint sort of point figures at Facebook and Amazon and Google, but I feel like the biggest enemy right now is our own apathy, and just caring enough and believing in ourselves enough and having enough faith to say, I'm going to do my little bit and just hope everybody else does their little bit, and that will turn the tide that we're in right now. Because we really have to be sober about and pay attention to the science of the moment that we're in.
Yes. And on that note,
I think that thank you for watching Code Bias and sharing it.
Right. Well, it brings us into hope. So like everybody who's seen this film, tell another person to see a film, watch it again, so just really quickly, like where else can, if you want to tell other people about seeing this film, where else can they see it, or where are you rolling it out?
It will be at festivals this fall, and the best thing to do is follow codedbias.com /screen. And it's just codedbias.com, and that'll take you right to our movie screenings page.
All right. This is wonderful. Thank you so very much for taking time out of your day to talk to us. This was, really fabulous. And again, I'm feeling Emmy. I'm feeling awards with this one. I'm feeling that for sure. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your kindness, and thank you for watching.